storm.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Stand by. It's Monday night. It's the 4th of December, and this is the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. As we have,
Yeah.
yes, a quiet weather week. I may see my first flurries here tomorrow night until we get to the weekend when we may get the big rain and the big wind here in the eastern part of the U.S. So we'll be talking about that in the long range, and that is coming right up. And the Joe and Joe Weather Show is brought to you by Tempest by Weather Flows. You still have lots of time to get a Tempest weather station as a holiday gift for the weather enthusiast in your life. You can get the revolutionary Tempest weather system and then join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link is pinned to the top of the chat board. It's also on the descriptor to this video, and Tempest is an affiliate of the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Use the coupon code, because coupon codes are nice this time of year. You save a little bit of money. Use the coupon code I want a weather station, and you will get
10 big % off.
That is right.
That is right.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, it's the 4th of December, so can the folks on the chat board cut the crap about being worried about the winter already? I guess, could we Joe, I really wish it would snow in November. Just once. Just snow in November. This way, the first one is out of everybody's system, and then we can just sort of wait to see what the rest of the winter season holds. But until we get that first snowfall, we have to get the endless posts of hopelessness to deal with, and I'm just not in the mood to deal with that sort of stuff.
This is Neil Chayet looking
at the law, yes.
Looking at the snow. What happened in the November-December period of 1977 when less than a half an inch of snow fell in Central Park, and Tom Contino said, well, it looks like it's going to be another bust in terms of the winter this season. Well, that's what happened back in 1977 when only 0.2 of an inch of snow fell in November and an additional 0.4 of an inch in the month of December. It looked grim for a snowy winter. Snow lovers everywhere, snow weenies were very upset. But then suddenly, in January of 1978, a major snowfall occurred, dropping more than 15 inches of snow in one night on the city of New York. 20.3 inches fell in that 1 month alone. And if everybody thought, well, that's it for the rest of the winter, they were wrong. 23 inches fell in February, including the great blizzard of 1978. So the bottom line of it is, regardless of what you see in November and even in the month of December, just wait, because sometimes things can change, and usually in winter they change on a dime. This is Neil Chayet looking at the snow.
For those of you who don't know what he's talking about here, which is probably the vast majority of you, unless you lived in New York. Well, actually, no, because he was syndicated around the country.
He was big in Boston. He was on CBS stations all over this.
Right. Neil Chayet was he did this on News Radio 88 and on other stations. This segment where it would be about a law case of some sort, and he'd always use bad puns in the law case in his story describing it. So Neil Chayet is no longer with us. So,
but I only use that as example as the fact that we have people out there who have already thrown in the towel, that they say, well, I don't see any snow in the foreseeable future. But as we have been saying all along, the pattern is going to change. It certainly will change. The supposed super El Nino never really is going to become super, and in fact, it may begin to diminish. Somebody may have poked a hole in the El Nino balloon, and it will slowly begin to.
Well, and let's not forget, there are other things that go. It's not just one thing. Right. It's not just the El Nino. I mean, there's a lot of other factors in play. There's the tropical activity in the Indian Ocean. That's a big deal. With the Madden-Julian oscillation, which I understand is illegal in some states. But you have that. You've got the polar vortex, and we're going to talk about that tonight because I think there's some interesting things going on with les vortex polar, as I like to call it, that might have some implications in a couple of weeks. So we'll take a look at all that. Look, we're in a place right now. We're in this sort of what if place. What if this happens? What if that happens? Because we still haven't really had a good indication of where the atmosphere is going to be taking us in the next month or so. Because ultimately, Joe, I think it's going to be like most winters. It's unusual to have a winter where it's very there's variability, wide variability, unless that becomes the actual pattern. But normally we kind of lock into something. In past years, it seems like we always seem to lock into something right around, starting around the third or fourth week of December, and then that becomes the primary pattern for the rest of the winter. There are notable exceptions to that. I'll give you one that was a really big one, was the winter of 2014-2015, which you had to wait till the middle of January. We did have one snowfall in what was a warmish December that was 3 degrees above normal. I think we only had maybe about 3 or 4 inches total to about January 20th, and then the whole bottom fell out. And the pattern, I remember there was a typhoon in a typhoon in the Pacific that wound up recurving, and it reinforced this gigantic upper low that was in the over the Aleutians, and then for the next 8 weeks, I mean, it really was until the end of March. I remember that winter specifically only because of the fact that it was very cold. We had all our snowstorms that winter, as in the winter before that, came with temperatures mostly under 20 degrees, and Lake Ronkonkoma was still frozen at the end of March, which is
Right.
as late as I've ever had ever seen it frozen that late, and we still had colder than normal temperatures into April, but by that time the sun angle just was able to melt all the ice away. But again, right now we're just sort of in this watch and wait mode. I wouldn't come to any conclusions based on what the weather pattern is now as something to take going forward. I mean, even last year we didn't lock into that horrible La Nina pattern until late in December, and then
Right.
it just then it was absolutely we had that cold blast right around Christmas, that bitter cold blast that came around Christmas, and after that we were dead until we had that next bitter cold blast that came in the beginning of February that lasted a few days. The one in December lasted a few days, and then it was back to the La Nina pattern. So we'll see. I mean, right now, again, we just you just kind of look and see what's happening and try to figure out, are the puzzle pieces going to be moving in different places, and try to get some clues.
Well, for the moment, we seem to be locked into a nearly hopeless pattern for snow lovers. In fact, after this burst of precipitation this coming weekend on Sunday, it looks like it may go into an extended period of dry weather for a while. But again, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, this El Nino pattern is expected to diminish rapidly as we move into January. And as I've been saying for a while now, the middle and latter stages of the winter look to be the times for all of you wintry weather lovers to get your thrills. I think that's when we're going to see ample amount. And as I said also, when we have a year like last year, when there is a paucity, a lack of any significant snowfall, always it has come to pass, if you look at the numbers, in the following winter, we seem to make up for it in spades. So I am not concerned. I'm actually, as a one who is not particularly thrilled to see snow, I'm actually enjoying this spell of non-snowy conditions now, because in the back of my mind, I know that I will probably be revving up the snowblower, maybe not in the immediate future, but sometime down the road, maybe mid or late January or into February. It is going to happen, folks. It is going to happen. So he
All right,
says.
so he says. Well, let's see what's going on. Welcome to everybody tonight on the chat board. It's nice to see everybody here. And welcome to those of you who lurk in the background, as you tend to do. We invite you to join the chat board and become part of the conversation, or perhaps you just want to lurk, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss us, because the Joe and Joe Weather Show is on Sunday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. In case you miss us, you can always watch us on a replay. We're also on Spotify, and we're on YouTube Music with this podcast, and probably in a few other places where podcasts are called home. And turn your notifications on, as I said, so you don't miss us. Scott Briller, the chairman, hitting super chat and being the first into the tip jar here. Yes, when Joe and I do our first snowfall forecast maps, uh, that would be the time to start thinking about, whether there's going to be accumulations. And we're revving up our pens, but we're not ready for that yet.
Not yet. Not yet. It
But
will, but we will. And I've done a snow map as early as the middle part of November. I think last year, Joe, I did maybe a grand total of 2 snow maps. And I think the last one was on March 14th.
yeah,
So we've got a lot of catching up to do this particular winter season.
I think I did. I don't know. I did a few more than that because I got so bored with not being able to draw one here, I started drawing them for other places. So I don't want to have to do that this year. I'm going to start off tonight with the polar vortex up in the stratosphere, because this is something that I've been kind of watching on a day-to-day basis, and actually I find it rather interesting and somewhat encouraging in terms of the possibility of an impact in the overall pattern coming soon. The thing is, with when you look at this, it doesn't always couple down to the surface. We had an entire winter where it didn't couple down, and that was the winter, I believe, I want to say it would be the winter of 1920, because there was no El Nino, no La Nina, and everybody was just sort of going up and jumping up and down. And bizarrely, the polar vortex wrapped itself up into a tight little. I'm sorry, that was not on that, but it didn't do that. Um, well, maybe it did. Maybe, I think, for a while it wrapped itself up like a tight little ball up in the Arctic and kept all the cold air up there. And then when it finally broke down and split, which it did in early February, and everybody's thinking, okay, we're going to go into a blocking pattern. Well, guess what? It never coupled down to the surface, to the lower
Right.
atmosphere. So that's really, that's an important factor. All this stuff going on is all fine and dandy, but it needs to couple down. Now, so far, things I think have been sort of behaving in sync. So if that's the case, if we watch the evolution of the polar vortex, and I've looked back at the last 7 or 8 runs, and it remains fairly consistent. The polar vortex, it's as important to note the orientation of the vortex as it is um, when you start to see that it's going to split, because when it's oriented in this sort of stretched out mode, and by stretched out, I mean, if you look at this, you'll notice how the contours kind of stretch out into a trough in the eastern part of the United States. Okay, so that sort of implies that we should be getting a flow coming from the northwest, from the Arctic regions into Canada. Now, we have seen shots of cold air. November was actually a little bit below normal temperature-wise for the month throughout much of the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic states. So this stretched out polar vortex at least has been allowing for some colder air masses to come down. But what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is that stretching gets, at least initially, it starts to look like it's going to wrap itself up into a tight little ball. And you see it here now. I've kind of moved it. I'm just going to check the date on this. So this is this coming Saturday. and it's a little bit less stretched going into this weekend and into early next week, but then it starts to really stretch and elongate. In fact, it almost looks like it's going to split in two here by the time we get to the latter part of next week. This is next Saturday, December 16th. You've got a very stretched out polar vortex here. The southern part of it is in northern Canada. The other part of it is in northern Siberia. And when it gets stretched like that, it's showing that it's really not a strong polar vortex. You want the polar vortex in the stratosphere to be weak. And then over time, as we move through the latter part of the forecast period to around the 20th of December, you've got this sort of broad, bowl-looking setup in the stratosphere that looks like it wants to create an alleyway for cold air to come down from northern Canada and from the Arctic down into the eastern part of the United States. Now, again, it's all fine and dandy. This is all great in theory. The question is whether it couples. But I think this is far better. I will just tell you that this is a far better look than if we were to see it wrapped up into a tight little ball, because that's when it's like that, Joe. That's when you get all the cold air gets locked away up in the Arctic regions and has no opening for it to come down. I think this is a bit, I think this is more of a bullish view for that, for colder air to start coming in on a regular basis.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, we saw that a couple of winters ago where it was like a bottle of club soda with a tightly capped, that's tightly capped, and you're just waiting for the cap to come off and for the soda, or in our case, the cold air to come gushing out and move southward. And it never did, because it was all bottled up, so to speak. That's the last thing that you want to see. A stretched out pattern like this is, not a pattern that is great, but it is certainly a lot better than what we've been dealing with. And I might also point out, Joe, I mean, Dr. Cohen, Judah Cohen, who specializes in making analyses based upon the polar vortex for the winter season. He was, constantly saying one thing and not having it happen, and he finally just threw up his arms and said, "I'm stumped." Now this year, he's saying that the pattern, based upon what he's been seeing so far, could go either way. There's still a lot of questions. In other words, these past couple of years have not been clear cut. They have been. If you've had to sit down and mull these things over, I mean, from the pattern, from my standpoint, it cannot possibly be a repeat of what we went through last year. It has to be better. I think it will be better. It may not immediately get better, but I think by mid and late winter, as the effects of the El Nino, whatever there is out there of it, fizzles out, we will see a pattern that will be more favorable for all of you snow lovers out there.
One thing I find encouraging is the fact that, a couple of things. One is that the North Atlantic oscillation has not really been able to get into positive territory for quite a while now. We've been, pretty much negative going back from the summertime, from the summer months, with a few short exceptions here and there. And that still seems to be the case here. The other thing that I think is interesting too is, okay, I've just backed it up to Friday, but it was pretty clear when you look at the way the upper air is shaped up that you had a trough in the west and ridging in the east. It wasn't a crazy trough in the west. It wasn't a really strong ridge in the east, but the overall flavor is that you had this troughing in the western part of in the west and back up into Alaska. So you got all of this in blue, which is where you don't want it for snow lovers, and all of this in orange, which is the ridge part, which is where you don't want it. But these appearances of these troughs in the west, it's not like last year where they've been there and just over and over and over again. They seem to be much more transitory, and I think that's a positive sign that this winter is going to be a different one. There's more of a tendency for storms to be in the Gulf of Alaska, or at least right along 160 degrees west. You don't have this fire hose jet that goes from Tokyo to San Francisco in a straight line, and that's a big plus. And we do see, as we move through this week, for example, we do have troughing in the eastern part of the United States. with some colder air that's going to be coming in over the next 2 days or so, and that's going to bleed down into the central and southern Appalachians, and I might even see some flurries here in North Georgia come tomorrow night into Wednesday morning. We'll see. And maybe some accumulating snow is not that far away from me in western North Carolina. That trough, part of it lifts out. And you can see this from the weekend. Part lifts out, another short wave drops in. This is for Tuesday night into Wednesday. Uh, kind of, it doesn't really amplify until it gets well offshore. Then, as that pulls out, you go back to a ridge as the trough drops into the plains and Rockies, and this goes negatively tilted in a big way, setting us up for what could be, could be a rain event here Sunday, Joe, with a screaming south wind ahead of it, and then a screaming northwest wind behind it.
And you're absolutely right. The winds. And I was telling this to Renata because the local German club is having their big annual holiday party, Christmas party on Sunday between 1 and 5 o'clock. And I said, what a coincidence. It appears that the party is going to kick off on a very wet and windy note, because right now it looks like rain will be moving in by 1 o'clock, if not a bit sooner. And it will be a windswept rain. You were absolutely right, Joe. We're going to be on the warm side of this advancing frontal line. Southerly winds blowing. Could be 20, 30 miles an hour, maybe even stronger gusts. Temperatures on Sunday could climb well into the 50s to near 60 degrees. Then, as the front moves on through, we'll have showery rains. They could be heavy, maybe even a rumble or two of thunder. But it's going to be a very progressive type system, so that by the time the party is over at 5 o'clock, it looks like the majority of the rain will be over, said and done. I'm hoping that we'll still have power by 5 o'clock. But that system will move on through, and then we'll get into a sweep of much chillier air for Sunday night and on into the early part of next week, in contrast to what we're going to be looking at for Friday and Saturday. Before the front arrives, it'll be a nice warming trend with temps in the 40s and 50s. Again, maybe close to 60 with windswept rains on Sunday, and then behind that, we'll turn chillier again. And after that front moves through, as I just alluded to a little earlier, we could go into a stretch of dry weather. I mean, a long-term stretch of more than a day or two. We could go through much of the following week, next week, with mainly dry conditions.
Keith James asks about, sort of for comparison's sake, to kind of overlay, to show. I unfortunately do not have the upper airs that I had from last year archived. I have them on my website someplace. I have some, and it'd take me a while to find them. But what I've done is I've overlaid what was probably the primary jet stream pattern from last winter, and notably absent this year is a southeast ridge, okay, which was the case last year for much of the winter last year, particularly from the early part of February on, after that cold blast pulled out. So you had the southeast ridge, you had a deep trough in the west, and the thing is, it just stayed like this. It just didn't change. I can remember from last year getting really frustrated over the fact that I would look in the long range out 16 days every single day and just see trough after trough after trough dropping into the western part of the United States. And
Yep.
and yeah, I mean, and of course, we all know what happened in California with the big snows last year, but that was the mean pattern for last year. And if you look at I've kind of laid it over to what the upper air is going to look like this Sunday, and it's totally different. I mean, it's totally different. Now, the one thing I want everybody to bear in mind is that there are so many different patterns that you could have that are not favorable for snowfalls in the coastal Northeast. So just bear that in mind. You could be right about the pattern of being different, but it doesn't automatically reflexively guarantee you anything. You can go one. I've always said, with pattern changes, be careful what you wish for, because the pattern change you want and the pattern change you get may not necessarily give you the outcome that you want. So just bear that in mind. Now, I'm going to take this a little forward. And this one, I know it was the off hours run, but I thought it was kind of interesting here. It drops another trough here the early part of next week. This is December 12th and 13th, and it does at least at the surface bring down another shot of cold air that's going to last for a few days. And then, of course, that trough pulls out. You get another trough dropping into the west, but at the same time, there's something that comes out of Montana that moves into the lower Great Lakes. And then also, this is another thing that happens. All of a sudden, this big block develops from an upper high near the Azores, actually well north of the Azores. Looks like it's closer to Iceland. So from England and Iceland, it starts building back right across southern Greenland. You know, that's quite an interesting looking block that it has at the end of the forecast period. And also, the jet gets displaced, and this is December 20th. So the jet gets displaced pretty far south across the U.S. The models are seeming to occasionally going on these routes where it wants to show and this is a colder, wintry, more wintry look certainly for much of the U.S., but especially for the East. Whether it verifies or not, I don't know. But I'm kind of encouraged, at least, that you're not getting, that mean trough in the west, and again, no sign of any southeast ridge. And I think that's important. That I think is probably the most important. You're going to want to have a little bit of ridging there, because if you have a completely flat, Joe, right, Joe? If you've got you got to have a little bit of ridging to force storms to make the turn and climb up the East Coast. If you don't have that, then you're going to wind up with systems that go way to the south and just,
Right.
continue on out to the east. So you want a little bit of ridging. You just don't want a ridge that flies all the way up to Maine.
Well, those kind of ridges not only will help the storm, a southerly track or storm that's taking a southerly track suddenly push northeastward, but that kind of a flow could also bring up enough warm air so that if you are looking for snow, it may not happen. You may actually have a snow to rain or just plain rain situation. So you don't want to overdo it. You gotta get everything just right," said the big bear to the little bear. Everything has
Certainly right now.
yes.
Certainly right now you do. When you get into the climatological coldest part of the year, winter, January and February and into early March, you can have a few things go wrong and still wind up with something. So, but for now, the pattern is what it is. And then if we, run through the surface, now we've got this upper air trough and this weak surface low tomorrow afternoon in southern Indiana with a little area of wet snow and rain that'll probably cause some accumulation in the central Appalachians, and then the low pops off the North Carolina coast and then goes goodbye to the Northeast. And this drags down some colder air. There's a high up in Quebec, so it's going to funnel down colder air during Tuesday night, Wednesday, and into Thursday. And then after that, with that energy that's swinging out of the plains, you see this low that comes into the Pacific. You actually have a couple of them. One that is coming in now, and then another one follows. The one that's coming in now makes a low that goes across southern Canada and heads over towards James Bay. The second one, you see snow spreading through the Rockies, northern and central, and then you got a low that comes out of Oklahoma and Texas into Missouri on early Saturday, and we've got a southwest wind here. We're going to warm up. Saturday's going to be the better of the 2 weekend days, and we should at least be, I think, in the 50s with this. And then here comes this low that runs to the lower Great Lakes and intensifies, and the gradient gets super tight. I mean, this is really crazy tight here for Sunday. We're going to blow away with a south wind here, and then rain, and maybe even some heavy rain possible, I think, Sunday morning into the afternoon. It might mostly be done by Sunday evening, followed by a cold shot, a colder shot, and then an even colder shot with a polar front that moves through on next Tuesday, and that spreads out a cold high into the eastern part of the United States for the second part of next week. So, but you're right about the dry part, Joe, too. After the storm goes, whatever happens on Sunday, it looks like much of next week is going to be dry, like this week is going to be dry.
Right. This week will be. I mean, we're not going to see. We'll see some sunshine, but we're also going to see, because the atmosphere is so loaded with moisture, what we're going to end up seeing are clouds. Probably, sun in the morning, then self-destruct sunshine, clouds building up in the midday and the afternoon. They'll carry over into a good part of the night. Then they'll fade out toward daybreak. We'll start the next day off with sunshine and see clouds. It's going to be that kind of a pattern, but no rain or snow or any precipitation until we get that big bundle of energy and moisture coming through our area on Sunday.
You know what's? I just realized this. I was just looking at this run. I don't know if it's going to verify this way, but if you look at what's happening here on Saturday and Sunday with this deep low that goes to the lakes and the really super tight gradient, southerly winds ahead of it, the northwest winds behind it. Actually, the gradient looks to be stronger ahead of it than behind it. But you have that, and then the next weekend, which is the weekend of the 16th, 17th, you have almost the same thing happening again. At least on this run, it's got a deepening low that runs up the east side of the Appalachians, coupled with a low in the Great Lakes that is the primary and just kind of picks up all this, Gulf moisture and a Gulf low that runs up. And again, you've got this sort of, strong southerly wind ahead of it, and then the strong northwest winds behind it with colder air. It almost, in a way, Joe, I could think of Novembers where we get storms like this. So maybe the calendar is just maybe we're running 2 or 3 weeks behind in terms of the actual weather you would normally see in November, and we're seeing it now. I mean, it's just a thought in my mind here, because we didn't see any storms like this during the month of November.
Right. And, all you need to do now is just simply change the trajectory. We may see, the trajectory may be occurring like this now in part due to the El Nino pattern. But if we can somehow have the El Nino weaken, which is anticipated to happen during January and February, that pattern of taking storms to the west of us may actually end up going perhaps more over us or just to our south. We may perhaps see more in the way of nor'easter activity mid and late winter. And that's exactly what some forecasters, for example, Bill Kirk at Weather Trends 360, has been saying that we're going to be seeing quite a few nor'easters, or a pattern more favorable for nor'easters once the El Nino weakens and dies out during the middle and latter part of the winter. So we'll see if that indeed is the case.
All right. Fled Weather, thank you, or as he's known as Fyodor Ledkovsky. Trying to get this. He just sent me the Euro weeklies. Okay, I see it's a loop here. All right, hang on a second. Let me see if I can save this. You know what? It's big enough. I might be able to pull this off. Let's see. I might not even have to save it.
I know you're going to make Tom Contino happy because he asked in the chat board a little while ago, anyone know if the European weeklies are available anywhere? Dr. Cohen is mentioning a change in early January.
Well, here are the European weeklies. This is the upper air. Okay, so now this goes out 864 hours, 888 hours, 936, 960, 984.
I'm laughing because
1104.
When Joe and I got into this, when we first got into this over 40 years ago, we would be jumping for joy if we could get even a sneak peek of a map that went beyond 72 hours.
All right, the European weeklies on the screen start at 336 hours. So after around the 19th of January, we see a decided shift to a troughing in the eastern part of the United States that actually strengthens as we move through the end of the year and the beginning of January. And that is the primary pattern. What's notable to me on this, Joe, is the fact that I'm looking at this and I'm looking what's going on in the Pacific Northwest and into the North Pacific. I mean, that's a negative East Pacific oscillation signature, which is, how much I love the EPO and seeing it negative. But if the European weeklies are right, it says that after we get through mid-month, we're going to see a notable change in the pattern. Now, it might take a week or so for that to play through, or maybe a little longer in terms of the process, but the model's pretty insistent here. It's been doing this. It's not just today's run of the European weeklies. If you go back to the European weeklies, I don't know, 500 hours ago, it was doing the same thing. So the evidence is there that the models are doing this. It doesn't mean that they can't flip at some point, but just you have to be you can't be discouraged by what you see. Let's put it that way.
No, I'm not discouraged.
No, I know. I'm not. No, I wasn't referring to you. I was just referring to the audience in general.
Right. But yeah, you gotta have some patience, folks. This is I know it's the 21st century. I know this is the era of instant gratification, but the weather does not work that way. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you get, a powerful front. Sometimes you get a flash freeze and everything changes instantaneously from rain to snow. But more often than not, you have to wait. You just have to wait for a specific pattern to set up and pretend this is a big bowling game, and you don't have an automatic pin setter. Instead, you have a very slow person at the end of the pin, at the end of the bowl, at the end of the alley, setting up the pins one by one, ever so slowly, instead of automatically poof, and they're there, and now you can start bowling it. It's going to take time. This pattern is going to change. It will change. And when it does change, I think a lot of you who are winter weather lovers and winter weather weenies will like this, but it's not going to change instantaneously or immediately. It's going to take a while. But as you can see on these maps that Joe was showing, the European forecast, over many hundreds of hours, things will eventually change out.
I'm just kind of looking. Mike Whitley. I'm sorry because I'm reading this backwards. So I'm seeing your last post that's saying he's here to line his pockets for clicks and views, not to provide accurate weather information. So I'm just curious as to who he is. I don't think you're talking about us. But I'm trying to go back here. Okay, apparently this person, positive PNA is all that guy talks about. Okay, so it's not me. I mean, I don't mention the PNA that often. Okay, so Bobby Livingsworth, Joe says, talking to Robert Hill, he says he is the worst forecaster on YouTube. Okay, so that's good. It's not us. Oh, okay, never mind. I see who you're talking about. All right, yeah. All right. I just wanted to check on that. We won't say who you're talking about. You guys on the chat board have already posted it on there. Okay, 59 likes. Thank you. Last night we got over 100. We didn't even have to ask, which is great. But tonight I'm going to ask if you like the show, hit the like button because Joe and I love it when we get over 100 likes. Satellite looks busy, but it's kind of much ado about nothing. There's not a whole lot in terms of heavy precip going on except in the Pacific Northwest. And as we check the radar this evening, and I will give it a quick refresh, there's still some snow going on up in northern Maine and in parts of northern New York. You've got this next disturbance that's moving southeast from Minnesota into Missouri and Kansas with some light precip, mostly rain showers, and that's moving eastward. And in the Pacific Northwest, they're getting clobbered right now in northwestern Washington with some heavy flooding rains and probably some heavier mountain snows up in the Cascades. Rainfall forecast over the next 7 days. The eastern half, Joe, this is all from this system for the weekend. 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch with some patches of 1.5 inches being indicated for most places along and east of the Mississippi. I don't think I can argue with that.
No, I'm not going to argue with it either. Excuse me, Joe.
That's quite all right. The Pacific Northwest getting clobbered with several to many inches over the next 7 days. And as we check out the snow forecast map in the west, you'll notice that it is, hang on, here we go. Yeah, it is in the west. Nothing crazy. Some of the higher I do see a 111-inch print in some spot in the Cascades there, Joe, 111. let's see if I could try to find out. It's somewhere east of east southeast of Olympia and Tacoma. This mountaintop gets 111 inches. And otherwise, it's fairly routine down into California in the Sierra Nevadas, nothing really crazy. And also up in the northern Rockies, a few inches, some places, maybe some odd places, a foot or so. And as we move into the east, we actually have some white stuff being indicated for parts of West Virginia. If the map will continue to load, we could see where the circle is going round and round and round, but it still hasn't loaded yet. But trust me, snow down the Appalachians through West Virginia, and they even mentioned in one of the statements in Western North Carolina that they above 3,500 feet, they're going to go to they may go 1 to 3 with possibly as much as 6 in some of the highest elevations in Western North Carolina.
And Western North Carolina, as we have mentioned before, has some rather tall mountains, so you can sometimes see some rather significant snowfall, even though they're much further south than New York. But those mountains are quite high, as is the case with you, Mr. Cioffi, where at a 2,200-foot elevation in northern Georgia.
Yes, I'm in the land of 2,200 feet. What do you think about temperatures? I think we might see 60 this weekend.
Yeah, well, I said on Sunday that with the windswept rains that we could see temperatures soar well into the 50s to near 60. I think on Friday we'll see temperatures near 50, and we'll probably be in the low 50s at least on Saturday. So I blew a chance this weekend to put out my outdoor Christmas lights, but I'm looking forward to those milder temperatures the end of the weekend, the start of the weekend, and the dry weather too on Saturday. Again, it looks like, just like this past weekend, Saturday will be the dry day of the weekend. Sunday most definitely looks to be quite wet, even wetter this Sunday as opposed to what we went through yesterday. I picked up about 7/10 of an inch of rain when it was all over said and done yesterday, Joe. And we may, well, from my vantage point right now, it looks like we could pick up almost twice as much as that with the showery rains coming our way for next Sunday.
Jose Garcia asks this question. He says, "Hey, Mr. Cioffi, you can call me Joe, Jose. I have a question for you, sir. What happens when the volcano that erupted in Indonesia, could that affect our weather climate in the U.S. or Northeast?"
And I laughed at that because if there's nothing else, what you've been hearing on newscasts and media outlets for the past 2 or 3 weeks is, well, they're still waiting for that huge volcanic eruption in Iceland. Iceland, they're standing by. Iceland, the earthquakes in Iceland, Iceland volcano, and all of a sudden,
it blows.
It wasn't Iceland. It was out in Indonesia.
I honestly, I haven't really paid much attention to what's been going on. So I really don't know what exactly happened in Indonesia. Do you, Joe?
I just heard that there was a big volcanic eruption and people were actually killed, and there were people who were actually either on the mountain or on the volcano when it erupted, and they lost their lives or whatever. But Renata was the one who told me about this, and I said, really? And what happened in Iceland? I mean, every day we're getting updates like, oh, any day now, Iceland's going to... And nothing has happened in Iceland. We're still waiting for the Iceland volcano to blow up.
I mean, that may still go.
I'm right. But, I mean, I have no clue, for example, this Indonesian volcano, just how strong was it? Was it like as strong as some of the big volcanic eruptions in the 20th century, like Pinatubo or even going back further to, Tambora or Krakatoa? I have no idea. They just said, oh, it's a big volcanic eruption. So, and the original question posted by one of the people on the chat board was, what is this going to do to our climate? If it is just a regular volcanic eruption, which the news media is always enamored by a volcanic eruption. They love to show the pretty pictures of the lava coming down or the big cloud going up, right? Unless it's a really major, a significant volcanic eruption, it probably will not have very much to do with our weather. We'll know in due time. But the Tonga volcanic eruption, which we had, what was it, about a year ago?
Yes,
Uh,
but that was
that,
that was undersea, and that was water vapor that had shot up.
yes, yeah. See, we'll see.
Well,
We'll see.
I'm I'm looking at last night's while you're talking. I was just because the last night's GEFs, the GFS ensembles, or as we know the ensembles as ensembles, or we also know it as shambles, is now out to 402 hours. And I'm looking to see on the snow, which is Wednesday, December 20th, and I'm looking at the ensemble snowfall forecast. And it doesn't show much yet. I just kind of curious as to what it shows when we take it. It takes it all the way out. I'm going to say this as just as a tool for you guys that look at maps. If you've got pivotal weather, you can the 0Z ensembles do have go out to 840 hours. So that comes out once a day. And so last night's 0Z beyond 384 hours gets updated 24 hours. It gets updated now. 24. There's been 3 runs of the GFS since, but now is when they put up those, the maps for the time frame beyond 384 hours get updated. One of the things I'm gonna do is, and I'll show it on the screen. So I've been kind of trying to pay attention to the ensemble snow forecast map out for the next 35 days. And you say, well, how can how's that even reliable? It's not, in a sense, but I think that since it's an ensemble forecast going out, it'll at least smooth things out when it comes to some of these GFS runs that you have. You know them, Joe, the ones that have 932 lows in the Gulf of Maine or produce 40 to 50 inches in the long range that never happen.
Right.
At least you get a much smoother look. And I mean, here we are on this one, for example. Now, this would be, again, the last day is the 20th on that's up so far. And if you look at some of the snow amount totals, I mean, it's got less than an inch for the coastal areas from Long Island down into Virginia. And the 1 foot numbers plus are where you would normally expect them to be, which is in the mountains of West Virginia on up through western Pennsylvania, western and northern, western, southern, and northern New York. So I'm just kind of looking at this. What I'm looking to see is that as we get to the long range, if we start seeing numbers like 6, 7, or 8 inches being printed down by the coast, it might be a good indicator of where the pattern is going. If it pitches shutouts or really low numbers, it'll also give you an idea where the pattern might be going in the longer term. But at least for now, it's just fairly, there's nothing nothing I could really glean from this. So I'll just have to wait for the whole run to finish up. But you have to be a subscriber to Pivotal Weather in order to see some of this super long range stuff, and I am, and I'm allowed to show it on the air, and I do post the map in my subscription platform on Patreon, which is patreon.com/meteorologist Joe Cioffi, among other things that you might not normally see in the general free world. So anyway, just wanted to throw that shameless self-promotion out there. You've got Briller Jeopardy tonight. I've got one too. So I don't know which of us went last, but I will defer to you, and you can go. You can handle this.
Sure. Let us go to what Mr. Briller sent me, and I think he sent this to me a while back. Let's see. This was sent to me last Monday, believe it or not. And he said, Joe, in your hand, you now hold the last envelope for lowest temperature per state on Briller Jeopardy. And of course, when he says that, he's making reference to Karnak, the Magnificent, on The Tonight Show, when Ed McMahon used to read off answers and Johnny had to guess what the question was. And when he got to the last envelope, McMahon would say, I have in my hand the last envelope, and the entire audience would give him like a standing ovation because they were so happy that the bit was about to end. Anyway, Joe, this is the lowest temperature per state. And tonight we're going to start off with Mountain Lake, Virginia. The coldest temperature ever recorded in the state of Virginia was in Mountain Lake. What was that temperature?
I will say minus 36.
Well, you were almost cold. You were a little bit too cold, though. But you were in the ballpark. I would say that you were at Gate D at Citi Field, handing the usher your ticket or your iPhone so that you can get into the ballpark. You were that close to it, but not close enough. A little bit too cold, though.
Okay. Good night, Mike Whitley. We got that all cleared up, so I'm glad. But good night, Mike Whitley. And the numbers coming in, Joe, fast and furious here. Bobby Livingsworth minus 21, Michael McGuire minus 27, Rich Rothmansky and Tom Contino say minus 29.
Ooh.
David
Yes.
Fuller minus 25. Johnny Quest has minus 30.
Tom Contino and Rich Rothmansky, you were almost there. You missed it by a hair.
Okay.
So what does that tell you?
So I'm thinking it's not minus 30, so it's probably going to be minus 28.
Why couldn't it be minus 30?
Well, because I had somebody that said minus 30. I said that.
Who said minus 30?
Oh, where'd he go? Johnny Quest said minus 30.
Oh, I didn't see that. Well, congratulations, Johnny Quest.
And so did Dave Carter.
Right, and Louis Alissi said minus 30 as well.
Okay.
So there you go. Mountain Lake, Virginia, minus 30. Now we go to Washington. Washington State, not Washington, D.C., Mazama and Winthrop, Washington.
I'm going to say, I spelt it wrong, but now it's up there. I'm going to say minus 59.
Yeah, a little too cold again, Joe.
A little too cold.
Well, maybe more than a little.
All right.
You're just plain too cold.
All right, I'm just plain too cold. Minus, what did I say? Minus 59?
Yes.
Okay, so that's too cold. Latex Dream says minus 30.
Not cold enough.
David Fuller says minus 29. Michael McGuire says minus 48.
Michael McGuire, you nailed it.
Nice.
Minus 48.
Minus 48.
And Rich Rothmansky also had a minus 48.
Okay, next.
West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Lewisburg, West Virginia.
Minus 36.
Joe, if it were a snake, it would have bit you.
Okay. Okay. Which means it's either minus 35 or minus 37. And Maggie P went with the 35.
See, Maggie, unfortunately, you missed.
Right. Which means that we should have gone to the minus 37.
Right.
All right. So it's minus 37, folks.
Right.
Minus 37. All right. What's the last one?
No, this is the next to last. So this is the penultimate.
Okay.
Temperature. Wisconsin. Corduroy. Is that corduroy?
As in pants?
Corduroy, Wisconsin.
Okay, Wisconsin. I will say minus double nickels.
Oh, my God. Joe, have you been Googling some of these answers?
How could I Google the answers? You just gave it, and I instantly gave you a number. Minus 55.
Minus 55. Minus double nickels, ladies and gentlemen.
Really? Did I get it on the nose?
You hit it right on the nose.
Oh, good God. Wow.
And the last one, I
swear, I didn't Google anything. I swear.
All right. Wyoming, Riverside Ranger Station.
This has got to be, it's got to be a big number. I mean, I'm going to say minus 69.
Ah, Joe, you didn't even wait for me to give you a little hint.
Okay. So what's the little hint?
WNBC.
Okay. So that's more than a little hint, Joe. That's a smack right across the head. Oh God. So is it 66?
Minus 66. Joe does it again, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
But only a little help from his partner.
yeah. I mean, but yeah, minus 69 was a pretty good guess.
Yeah.
I
And
mean, the minus 55 in Wisconsin was just sheer luck. I mean,
yeah.
I should hit a lotto ticket when I do something like that, or a pick three or something.
Abdevin Durakovic, minus 66, and Bobby Livingsworth, minus 66.
By the way, I
And so
just
was Bartmansky as well.
yes, I just want to go back to Jose Garcia because then he also asked, well, what happens when the Iceland volcano erupts? Well, look, I think the best way to approach this is just we have to kind of wait for them to erupt, and then we have to see whether okay, did it spew ash and how far out did the ash get how far up did the ash get spewed? Did it get was it 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet? Is it up in the stratosphere? Because it's really got to get up there in the stratosphere in order for it to cause a significant cooling. And it would have to be a lot. It would have, it'd have to be a big eruption. And, it takes time for that to, it doesn't instantly cover the earth. It takes time for that to spread out. So I would say that even if those volcanoes do erupt, the short-term implications of it are probably very little.
Right.
And the implications down the road, a month from now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now, I think would be more pronounced. But we
Yeah.
got to wait for this. We have to wait for these things to happen. We can't. There's no way to know until an eruption occurs, if it occurs. And Etna's, going in Sicily.
Yeah. So all of a sudden now, all the volcanoes are are beginning to belch, so to speak.
I really would like to ask somebody that knows about volcanoes and just to get an understanding of this because and I don't even know, it may be totally unrelated, but I've been reading articles about the methane holes that are that have been forming across the Arctic region as methane gas because of the permafrost melting. Methane gas is getting emitted and it's creating it's getting emitted through lakes and ponds up in Alaska, for example, where if you light a match, you could actually, see flames from the methane that's coming up. And I just was, kind of crossed my mind in terms of volcanic eruptions, which of course are all earthquake related. I mean, is there a methane angle to this? Because all these volcanoes are getting very active all at the same time. I don't know. And again, it could be totally two, it could be apples and oranges. I just don't, I don't know what the answer. I don't know what the answer to that question is. I'm not a volcanologist,
A volcanologist.
a volcanologist. My
I
name
asked a
and my name
question
is not Spock.
10 years ago. About 10 years ago, I had an interview with Gavin Schmidt, who is a British climatologist, a climate modeler, and the director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies here in New York, believe it or not. And I said, in the late 1600s, early 1700s, there was like a little ice age, and there are some scientists who claim that it was a lack of sunspots that led to that. And I won't say he snapped at me, but he said, absolutely not. The sunspots and solar activity has very little to do with our climate. So I said, so what are you saying? Why did we have that during a lull in sunspot activity? Why did the temperatures go down so sharply across the northern hemisphere? And he said it was due to an increase in volcanic eruptions, that there were a lot of volcanoes that were erupting and a lot of aerosol clouds, ash and dust being put into the atmosphere, which served as kind of a screen and blocked off not all, but some of the solar rays from penetrating down to the Earth's surface. And that in turn lowered the temperatures noticeably or significantly and led to a spell more than a half a century of below normal temperatures. So he is in the camp that says that we cool because of volcanic eruptions and not because of solar activity or sunspot activity.
This brings up another question. I was watching PBS NewsHour tonight, and they had their scientist reporter on talking about the fact that they discovered a new solar system 100 light years from us
Right, with 6 planets.
with 6 planets, and apparently they are orbiting around a single, a sun, a star,
Right,
and the planets are orbiting in harmony with each other,
right.
which is, pretty interesting.
There's like a resonant effect in the orbital path, so that you're right. They're kind of like going around. Each one is going around based upon what the others are doing as well.
Right. And
So the question
and
is,
they explained and they said that our solar system might have started that way, but because of we're in sort of a busy freeway of asteroids and all the rest of it that have pummeled planets that have maybe impacted their orbits to some degree, that our planets aren't like they're not in sync in the way that these planets are. They were all about the size of Neptune apparently. Um, but it was really interesting. I mean, it's only 100 light years away, which means that, the Jupiter 2, which left in 1997 and was supposed to arrive in Andromeda in 5 years.
Alpha Centauri.
Alpha Centauri, right. I'm sorry, Alpha Centauri in 5 years. Um, so that means that they got there 21 years ago. But, you know, it does give, 100 light years is not that, it's practically down the block.
On the block. Yes, exactly. And it'd be with radio waves, traveling at the speed of light, in about another 30 or 40 years, if there are anybody on that planet or those planets that have radios or television, they'll be able to tune into our old time radio shows from, starting with like the 1930s.
Which I'm sure that's what they want to do.
And maybe they'll become big fans of I Love Lucy and the Honeymooners.
Actually, Joe, we're probably getting beamed out on some satellite someplace, and perhaps some alien force might recognize that it might not be a bad idea that on their planet that they purchase a weather station from Tempest by Weatherflow, and they can get the revolutionary Tempest weather system and join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link is pinned to the top of the chat board. It's also on the descriptor of this video, and whether you are on Earth or perhaps you are an alien person, you are also eligible to use the coupon code I want a weather station, because if you do, you'll get
10% off, but I don't know how they're going to be able to get one of these planets is 100 light years away. I don't know how Tempest can make a delivery.
Well, that's true. Well, they could probably send their own version of FedEx to pick it up if they're that civilized.
Exactly.
I always try to do a commercial at the end of the show, so that was a good way of like sneaking it in there. If you have anything else to add on this Monday night?
No, not really. We'll be back here again tomorrow night at 7:35. So we want all of you to be out there. And my goodness, Joe, we can't shut the show down until we get 2 more likes. According to my counter, we have 98 likes.
All right. Well,
I'm
trying to think if there's anything, there hasn't been a whole lot news-wise, weather-wise that we could complain about or rant. I'm at 99. Usually
I just hit 100.
You just hit 100.
I'll hold the bell far away so it doesn't.
Hold on. Go ahead.
100 likes.
Even pulling the ears away, it's loud. It's mind-blowing. Don't do it again.
No, this is the old bell. Can you hear that? Or
yeah, I actually can hear that one. We can always hear that, but that one, the big bell, is a different story. But okay, we got 102, so we padded it a little bit. All right, folks. Sweet dreams. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great night. Nighty night.
Nighty night, folks.